They say death follows the man in black. But when he rode into town with a coffin tied to his horse and eyes full of storms, no one dared to ask who it was for. Not yet. The sun was bleeding into the desert sky when he arrived, a lone figure, atop a black horse, dragging a dust cloud behind him like a funeral veil. The town of Dustwood hadn't seen a stranger in months, and certainly not one like this. He wore a long brown duster that flapped with each stride of the horse, a wide-brimmed hat, pulled low, and slung behind him on a small cart. A coffin. Not just any coffin. This one was hand-carved, black oak, polished, and gleaming despite the desert grit. Too clean for a place like this. Too ominous. The townsfolk didn't greet him. They watched from behind dirty windows and saloon doors that creaked open an inch, then shut again. The rider didn't speak, didn't tip his hat, didn't ask for directions. He just stopped in front of the sheriff's office and dismounted, with a slow, deliberate grace. Then, with gloved hands, he unhooked the coffin cart and left it there right in the middle of the road. Like a warning, the horse walked itself to the trough. The man didn't even glance back. Sheriff Amos Greeley was an old dog with shaky hands and a broken past. He watched the stranger walk into his office like he'd done it before. The man didn't knock, just stood there, tall, quiet, and heavy with silence. "You need something?" the sheriff asked. The man nodded toward the window, to the coffin, just making sure it's visible. "Who's it for?" The man stared for a long second, then said, "A man who needs reminding." He turned and left. By nightfall, the town was thick with questions, but none dared ask the man who now sat alone in the corner of the saloon, drink untouched, eyes locked on the swinging doors. He wasn't here for company, nor for liquor. He was here for someone, and Dustwood began to shiver. By morning, the coffin hadn't moved. Neither had the man. Miss Delia, who ran the general store, swore she saw the stranger standing under the church bell at midnight, praying or talking to ghosts. She couldn't be sure. Others said he hadn't slept at all, just stared at the coffin under the moonlight. The sheriff sent his deputy to ask the stranger again, who was the coffin for? The deputy didn't make it back for hours. When he did, he looked paler than ash. He said, "Whoever needs it most. That's all." People started locking their doors in the middle of the day. Mothers whispered to children not to look out windows. The preacher started prepping Sunday's sermon on judgment and repentance a few days early. The stranger hadn't fired a shot, hadn't raised his voice, and yet Dustwood felt like it was on the verge of something biblical. Sheriff Greeley finally walked over to the coffin, hoping for a clue. No nameplate, no scratches, nothing, but inside the lid, carved so fine only sunlight made it visible, were the words, "Time waits for no sin." That's when the sheriff remembered something buried deep in his past. A story from 15 years ago, a tale of a town, long burned down, where a man had once dragged a coffin through the streets and left 6 bodies behind. Not out of anger, not out of vengeance, out of justice. The third day, a gambler named Clay tried to test him. Loudmouth, fast hands, always looking to be feared. He strutted into the saloon, shoved the stranger's table with his boot. "You the one right in with a box?" The stranger didn't move. Clay leaned in, whispered, "You looking to put someone in it? Better make sure you finish the job." Silence. Clay grinned, stepped back, drew fast, but not fast enough. A single shot echoed. Clay's hand was pinned to the wall, revolver knocked away, blood dripping down. No one even saw the stranger move. He stood, stepped over the groaning man, holstered his gun. "You'll live," he said coldly. "That coffin ain't for cowards." From that moment on, even the bravest avoided him. That night, the coffin was opened for the first time, just a crack. The undertaker swore he saw something inside, but refused to say what, just muttered, "It's too real, too ready." Sheriff Greeley couldn't take it anymore. He found the man on the edge of town, staring at the desert like it held the truth. "You were in Red Hollow, weren't you?" The man didn't deny it. "You served under Judge Marston?" Still, no. Denial. "You were the one they called the marker." The man looked up. His eyes, for the first time, showed emotion. A glimmer of pain, or maybe resolve. "I don't do revenge," he said. "I do reminders. Of what's owed." That's when Greeley knew. The coffin wasn't just a threat, it was a message. Someone in this town, maybe more than one, had a debt to pay. Not in gold, not in favors, in truth, in consequence, and the marker was here to collect. On the 4th night a dust storm rolled in. Winds howled like the dead. Lightning cracked over the mountains, and the coffin, it was gone. Vanished. Panic spread. Doors slammed. Guns were loaded. Prayers whispered. The marker stood in the middle of the road, dust swirling around him like spirits summoned. His coat whipped behind him, hat held firm, eyes shut. He wasn't afraid. He was waiting. At exactly midnight, the church bell rang, though no one had pulled the rope. The townsfolk gathered behind windows, afraid but drawn. Then came the sound. Boots. Dozens. A group of riders came down from the hills, men from Greeley's past, outlaws once buried by deals, betrayals, and dark pacts. Men Greeley had helped vanish. They weren't supposed to exist anymore, but they came for justice, and the marker had invited them. The shootout didn't last long. It wasn't a battle, it was a cleansing. Greeley tried to run, but the marker was already there, as if time bent. For him, I gave you time, the marker said. I was a younger man. No, you were always this man. A single shot ended it, not with vengeance, but with peace. The town didn't cheer, didn't mourn. They watched silently as the coffin was pulled back into view, like it had never left. Inside lay the sheriff. The marker closed the lid gently, wiped his hands, mounted his horse. He turned once. I hope the rest of you live better. Then he rode into the dust, just as the sun rose. The town never saw him again, but every year, on the same date, a fresh coffin appears outside the sheriff's office, and no one ever asks who it's for, because in Dustwood, everyone's done something worth burying. Iron Dust Chronicles ain't done tellin' stories yet, so stick around, subscribe, like, and leave your mark in the comments before the wind blows this one away.